not called a bass drum. A bass drum is when you're in a marching band and you're like hitting it like a monkey. This is a kick drum because you kick it with your foot. So that's what this drum is.
So I'm just hanging out here at the studio with Waverly and just wanted to film a little something about miking a drum kit. In my opinion, one of the hardest things to get right, especially in a studio setting. And there's a lot of tricks that I haven't seen talked about online. Well, here, let's actually frame up the drum kit. I have this drum kit over here, which is actually Waverly's drum kit, and it is mic'd up because it was used in a session. There's Waverly.
Hey.
And so I have all the microphones on it, set up how I normally would do it for like a standard rock setup that is pretty moldable. I figured while it's all here and ready to go, may as well like talk through my philosophy of like why I place mics in certain ways, why I choose certain microphones, like what qualities I'm looking for in them. Just give like a full like my Josh's like MasterClass of how to mic a drum kit, the reasons for it, like what to do. And maybe while we have like a pro drummer here, we can like ask, hey, you know, what kind of sounds do you want? You know, because you've been in a lot of instances where you are the one paying for the studio time.
Yeah.
What are you like wanting to get out of drum recordings? Like what do you look for when you go to a place and you're trying to get drum recordings?
I want to have an experience that's comfortable.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel like there's any confusion coming from my engineer, you know, and I don't want to get there and stuff isn't set up.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I bring those recordings to someone else to mix, or they stay with the engineer who recorded them. So I just want to trust that the quality is like, that whoever I bring them to is not going to say like, what the heck were they doing? Like, why can't I mix this?
Right. When you hear your drums in like the final mix of a song, is there like an easy way for you to describe what the sound of a good drum recording is, using just like not engineer language?
I guess I've heard my drums be recorded in a way that doesn't sound like it was in an actual place. I don't know, like it'll sound all squeezed and like tiny, or like there's a filter on it, like a kind of like a Instagram filter, but like for sound.
Right.
So when I hear a good recording, to me, that's like, I feel like I'm standing in the room with the drummer there, and it's like as close as like it sounds to my regular ears, and not like it's being squeezed through a bunch of wires and mics and like all this stuff has been done to it.
I totally understand what you're saying, and I feel the same way about my drums. I feel the same way about other people's recordings and mixes that I hear, where a lot of the times they don't feel like they're real drums. They don't feel like great drum recordings don't exactly sound like drums do in the room. They sound like an even better version. Like they sound like a hyper good, but it still sounds like a real drum kit in a real room, but it sounds like the biggest, most explosive real kit in a real room, and not like computery, sampley. So it all comes from that place of how do we get this as real as possible without having to fake it and remove some of the humanity and some of the real explosiveness.
For sure.
Yep, so hopefully I can explain that right here. Look how blue
Can
I am.
Can I have a moment where I describe what the parts of the drum
You're live. You're live right now.
Is this my moment? This is called the snare drum. Yeah, this is not called a bass drum. A bass drum is when you're in a marching band and you're like hitting it like a monkey. This is a kick drum because you kick it with your foot. So that's what this drum is.
Before I even get into microphone choice, before I get into mic placement, before I get into any of that, I'm gonna give you the biggest secret to drum recording that I barely ever see people talk about, but it is by far like the most important things, and your recordings are gonna sound like crap if you don't do it. In order to get great sounding drum recordings, you need a great sounding kit that's in tune, you need a great drummer that's playing the drums, and you need a room that sounds good for drums. If you don't have those things, you're not gonna get a great drum recording without using cheating like samples and gating super hard and all that.
If the drummer can't do this, then your recordings are gonna sound like this little thing right here.
I think first I want to talk generally about like my larger philosophy of miking a drum kit, to explain like why I make the decisions on exact mic placement, and then after that we'll just go through one by one each individual mic placement, and then I think Waverly's going to help us out and even play a little bit with different mic placements, and then we can look at just to see how things fit together. So in terms of like the philosophy of miking a drum kit, the biggest thing that you have to keep in mind is that our end goal is to get a great sounding drum kit that is the culmination of about 10, 11, 12 different microphones, all hearing the same sounds at the same time, being combined together to give you one entire drum kit recording. A lot of the times when people are doing like mic shootouts and mic reviews of, microphones in general, but especially when it comes to drum microphones, they usually just do comparisons of individual drum microphones, like for example a kick drum, and they'll give you a bunch of different samples of a bunch of different kinds of kick drum microphones, but they won't be playing that with an entire rest of a drum kit to hear the context of what that kick drum sounds like. And I think that's kind of useless because, again, when you hear a kick drum, it's not just coming from the kick microphone, but it's also a little bit coming through the snare top mic, the snare bottom mic, it's coming through the overheads, it's coming through the room mics. So just listening to the isolated kick drum microphone doesn't really tell you much about like how it will fit into the final larger picture, unless you are doing a massive amount of gating or you are just doing sample replacement, at which point I believe you start to suck the life out of the drum kit, suck the humanity out of the drum kit, because everything is just constantly changing in volume and dynamic because different gates are going on and off for different microphones. It's impossible to like perfect a great drum mix if your targets are constantly changing because gates are making everything pop in and out constantly, especially in like the cymbal. Every time you hit the snare, suddenly the high end of the hi-hat comes way up, and then if you're just gating super hard constantly throughout your mix, the hi-hat is just going and that sounds bizarre. So we want to get it as right at the source so that we require as little gating as possible. The other big thing, there is just an inherent aspect that because we are not suffocating this mix using a ton of gating, then we do accept that every microphone will be picking up a little bit of every single drum and cymbal that's being played. So we constantly have to think about phase cancellation.
I was just like, oh, that'd be crazy if it was just on the screen, phase cancellation.
Waverly wants me to do phase cancellation. Waverly wants me to make more work for myself in post. So I'm not going to explain what phase cancellation is. Either you know it or you don't. And if you don't know it and you're trying to record a drum kit, find a YouTube video, look it up, figure out what phase cancellation is, because it is a massive part. So with the understanding of what phase cancellation is, we have to place every microphone understanding that it's going to pick up everything else, and that mainly comes into place with the kick drum and the snare, because the kick and the snare, in my opinion, on a drum kit are supposed to be the most rock solid, foundational, punchiest, hardest hitting sound. So we want to make sure as many of the microphones are phase aligned to the hit of the snare and the punch of the kick drum as possible. that just makes the kit feel floppy and like it's missing impact. Drives me crazy. And once again, like a huge part of this is just tune your drum kit. Great room, great player, but I'm not gonna go over that right now. Waverly just made a really good point.
I know you really want to place your microphones and everything, but before you can do that, you gotta check with me and make sure that the kit I'm using is set up in a comfortable way. Because I'll sit down and the mics are already there sometimes, and unfortunately I kind of have to move a bunch of stuff because I have like T-Rex arms and stuff.
No.
If that's okay to say.
Yeah, no, it's a great point.
You gotta move them again,
just let the drummer set up and then put your mics in. Yeah.
Just let the drummer set up.
Okay, so I just want to talk through the microphone choice and microphone placement one by one, and then if there's any like interesting comparisons we can make, Waverly might hop on the kit and give us a little bit of that. So, kick drum. There's a lot of like totally acceptable kick mics that people choose. My choice is the Beta 52, and this is actually a great example of why just comparing drum mics like in isolation soloed is not very useful, because I think just isolated, the Beta 52 sounds really weird. It sounds not like a kick drum, like to my ears in the room. But when placed in a mix, it does absolutely everything that I want it to do, and it doesn't add unnecessary frequencies that are just going to get muddy or are already being covered better by other microphones. To me, this guy sounds like a bit boxy on the high end, missing a little bit of like high-end crackle of like the pedal hitting the kick drum. But those are picked up really well by other microphones, and the thing that this does super well is just low and beefy punch, and then just enough top end to just give you like pedal smack, but without like overwhelming like the high-end frequencies where you want stuff to stand out more, like crisp cymbals and yada yada yada. In terms of placement, the three like main places that I've seen is just on the kick drum head, you know, just somewhere around here pointing at it. I've seen some people go right in the port or right outside the port, somewhere around here. And then the one that I have found I like the best is putting the microphone pretty much in the center-ish of the kick drum, away from the porthole. And I want to make sure the microphone is facing where the kick beater hits the head on that side. Yeah, and I find if I place the microphone here, it kind of gets, it's just about a bunch of wind passing through this porthole. So it's basically like the low end energy of your kick drum mic is just coming from like wind getting blown on it. And I don't find that that has like the good direct punch of the low end that I'm looking for. It makes a lot of low end, but it's not like precise low end. And then out here, I find that it just also lacks low end energy. It's more of like a jazz thing, I think, to put something over here, like an RE20 usually right here gets a bit more of a jazzy thing. So for doing like a really versatile drum setup that can be mixed either to be something a lot more intimate, punchy, or you mix in more room and smash it a little bit and you get like a, you know, back of the warehouse sort of drum sound. I find that the most versatile drum sound does come from a Beta 52, about halfway in the kick drum, facing the kick pedal, and it just sounds awesome.
Opinions from the drummer that you never asked for.
Yeah, what do you like about a kick drum sound?
I have a caveman brain because I'm a drummer, and so when I hear my recording back for the first time, like the rough mix, the only thing I'm thinking about is, can I hear the kick drum? I guess I've had a lot of experiences where that's the thing I have to ask for the most is, can you boost the kick drum for me? And then I have to ask again. And I don't know if like I'm weird and I like that the most, or if that's actually an obstacle usually. But yeah, I'm always just like, turn that shit up. And if you were to ask me, I wouldn't have done it like this because I don't know what I'm doing. I would have placed the mic like right here,
Yeah, and that's a lot of people do that.
Because that's where the sound comes out to me.
Yeah, and that actually brings up a really good point right now, which is I'm giving like my Josh masterclass on like how to record drums. But lots of people have recorded drums using totally different techniques, and they've gotten incredible results.
So it's personalized.
It is personalized, but this is my philosophy and techniques of recording drums, but that doesn't mean it's the only correct way. I just hope this information is useful to, for people to like stick in their recording tool belt, and if they're struggling, maybe they try one of my techniques and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But
Josh, I have a question.
Absolutely.
How come some people have put a big blanket on my kick drum?
Yeah, so the blanket on the kick drum, what I have found, so when I've done recordings in this room, I have actually, that's why this thing's on here, I put one of those sound packing blankets over the kick drum, just broadly drape it over, and then clip it in place so it doesn't move. The reason I do that is because sometimes drum rooms, you'll get a lot of the frequencies like the decay, the reverb, to all be really, really good, but they're still like out of control low end at certain frequencies. Or maybe you're just dealing with a kick drum that is massive. What is it? How many inches is this again?
This is a 24-inch.
24-inch kick,
Yeah.
And it's deep too. So this thing booms, and it sounds awesome in person, but sometimes we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. But the blanket is mostly, to me, for the room microphones, because I want the room microphones to have a nice, even frequency response, and a big boomy kick that is just directly blasting at room mics sometimes is just like 5-6 dB too much. And I don't have the ability and budget to stuff my corners floor to ceiling with low end absorption. So it's you put a blanket on it, low end control. Okay, so next mic, let's talk about Snare Top. In terms of mic choice, man, it's pretty hard to justify not doing a 57, an SM57. You may notice that I'm using...
Nice.
Got it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a company, I always forget its name, Granelli Audio Labs G5790. It is just, this company just takes SM57s and puts a right angle in it, so I love it. And this is another example of like, usually a snare drum mic isolated doesn't sound quite how you want a snare to sound. But what you're looking for from this microphone is like the body, like about 200 to 300 hertz, like really, really good information of like the thump, the smack of a snare top. And then also a bit of that like 1-2K, sort of that high mid-range, crunchy sound, like a bit of this sound of the snares on the bottom, but mostly you're looking for like the thwack of like the top of the snare drums. And then a lot of that other like the really high-end information of the snare is picked up by the overheads and the hi-hat mic, and, you know, those like small pencil condensers that you use. But the SM57, I mostly look for that like low mid body and that like high mid thwack. Hopefully that makes sense. Something that I don't see talked about a lot is that you're not actually getting the sound of an SM57. You're getting the sound of an off-axis SM57 because no one mics a snare with a 57 pointed straight down at it. You're actually getting mostly off-axis recording. And what I find that does is it removes just like too much of the like muddy, boxy low end and allows the like high mids to breathe and like come through and be heard much better. So if you're miking a snare and you find that you're getting like too much body, too much low end, it's usually good to like move it off axis. In fact, once I was doing like a drum session and I'd never done this before, but I was like trying to, figure out the right placement. I kept coming back and forth from the control room after recording a little bit, being like, it doesn't quite sound right. And the drummer was like, hey, for this like jazz sound, I always find like literally putting the 57 like perpendicular to the snare with the capsule like right at the rim, it sounds awesome. And I was like, the mic is like almost not even pointing at the snare at that point, but I'll try it. And I tried it and it was just right off the bat exactly correct. So if you are miking a snare and you feel like the EQ is off, don't just like throw an EQ plugin on there right away. I would first recommend try changing the angle of the microphone if you can. And the other thing that we're always fighting is the placement of the hi-hats. Boy, some drummers just really like the hats and the snare to be as close as possible so they can just move back and forth really quickly. For the most part, you have to let them just place the drums where they want to place them and work with what they give you. What we're trying to do is we're just trying to point it as away from the hi-hat as we can to get as much rejection as we can. Any gating that we do to the snare drum, every time that gate opens, suddenly our hi-hat is getting way louder and it gets phasey because it starts messing with other microphones, and we just want to avoid that as much as possible. So this is really a true spot mic where we're just trying to get as much snare as possible, reject as much else as possible. If you're not going with the super classic 57, I have seen other people try to get more like crisp top end by using like pencil condensers. I've seen like AKG 451s. I've seen also just a wide variety of other, 57 type microphones. There's stuff from like SE Electronics that I've heard good stuff about. Audix makes good stuff, but I find that just using a 57, like, guess what? It's not like the most faithful, realistic representation of anything, but it's been on 10 million recordings, so even though it's not reflecting reality perfectly, it is reflecting what a lot of your favorite songs ever sound like.
Yeah, do you have any thoughts on snare drum in general?
The snare sound is the hardest thing to like. Is that okay to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
It is the most difficult thing for me to like. I think I've seen enough memes, been in enough group chats to know that this is a shared opinion, perhaps. And you never want someone to come up to you and say like, the hardest thing to hear after a set is your snare sounds like shit. And it's even worse to hear that in a recording, because that's forever and you've now immortalized your garbage snare sound. So like Josh was saying earlier, like the starting point is a good snare drum. And don't bring your live snare drum to your recording session. I mean, bring it, but know that it's probably not going to fit the need of your recording. But one thing about me is I'ma hit the mic with the stick. One thing about me.
Yeah, this is another great reason why we use 57s, because
Yeah.
Sure, we could be putting like Neumann whatever on the snare drum and any other place in this kit, but if there's like a chance of them getting smacked, maybe don't pull out your most expensive thing, because
And like there's a chance. Like I get very emotional and carried away and I will hit the microphone with the stick.
Yeah.
Some people will mic the kit and it's sticking out like this far and I'm like, my brother in Christ, I'm going to owe you money later.
The ones that do get hit the most are snare and then the toms. Usually hi-hat's safe, ride is safe. Most people don't even do hi-hat and ride mics, but and then overheads, I have had overheads smacked, but that's because I like my overheads a little bit lower than most people. So actually, before a recording even starts, I'll like talk with the drummer and just be like, hey, if you're going at it, How high do your sticks usually get? Do you do the full overhead, bring it down sort of thing? Like the overheads tend to be some of the most expensive microphones on like a drum mic setup. In terms of like the tightness or the stereo image, I find like you can spare a few inches up or down and you're just about getting a pretty similar sound. So I'm willing to do that to not lose like $1,000 microphones.
I have a question,
Yeah.
Joshua.
Yeah. Oh, the rim. Yeah. That's a great point.
Why is there no microphone? Well, there is.
There is.
There is a mic on the rim, but I always thought like, wow, there's a mic on the bottom and a mic on the top.
You know, I have found some people will mic the shell, and that actually gets a lot of like the rim noise, and then obviously a lot of it comes from the snare top. I find that like in terms of my standard mic setup, the thing that gives me like rim click is the overheads.
Oh.
If
I mean, it's a high sound, right?
So long as the drummer is like playing in a way that is like self-mixing, self-balancing,
Yeah.
I find that the overheads actually get like the nicest sound for like a rim click, a rim shot. And then for any like additional body that I need, you know, I find the snare top works. I don't usually find like I need an additional microphone for that kind of thing.
Makes sense.
And maybe that leads us into snare bottom.
Snare bottom. Pull it out.
So I don't have like the most to say. I am using right here a Sennheiser. I used to use the old ones, which is this is a 906, 409. What is it? Maybe don't name every single one of your microphones just like a string of numbers.
It's a Sennheiser E609
609. Okay. I used to use the 409s. Now I use the 609s. I find that they, despite a wild price difference, they do just about the same job. I've done a lot of testing with Snare Bottom, and I find that within a mix, the thing that I really want the most out of it is just like the crackle of the snares, and then just good isolation. Where the capsule is like really close to the grill. I like that because I can just get it really, really close to the snares. So it's picking those up way more than anything else. I get great rejection. I'm not getting like a ton of kick drum picked up. So I'll just stick it like near the edge of the snare drum, and I'll put it right under where the snares are. And then I can just blend it in and give it a bit of that like crispy crackle, you know, as desired.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what Josh is talking about. I love it.
For toms, I used to use the MD421s, the like world's most classic tom mic. I generally find like any sort of small like dynamic microphone that's in the vein of like a 421, a 57, any kind of like handheld-y sort of thing. I have these Audio Technica, I don't even know what they're called. They're like ugly microphones, but they're like a really good live handheld mic, and they work great on toms. Great rejection. You want a dynamic microphone for that. I think the 421s probably are my favorite, but I have also used like the Sennheiser 409s on the top. I really like those too. I have also done the thing where you do top and bottom. I find that gets you a lot more low end miking the bottom, and you have to remember to phase flip the bottom, but yeah, I think for most modern production, you're just looking for more of that like top end information and less so like the bottom end information. But that is one of those things where if the genre calls for it, I will stick like a bottom mic on the tom. And usually for like a rack tom, I'll do like another 421 or 409 or something like that. For the floor tom, have this trick where you lay down a pillow underneath the floor tom, and then you just put another like Beta 52 on a stick or whatever on a little mic stand, and you just lay it down facing upward on the floor tom. And I find that like bit of separation with it pointing at that just gets really great low end body combined with the top mic on the floor tom, just to give it both like great smack and great low end like punchy body. That's about it for rack toms. I also find that for toms in general, you don't have to worry too much about like making sure the microphones are facing away from like cymbals, like ride, crash, whatever. Because I find like tom hits are loud enough and like explosive enough that they're gonna kind of override most cymbal information anyway. Just try your best to like aim them away from local, like this is easy. Like I could probably, you know, have this under here, point so that the microphone is rejecting as much of this ride as possible, but toms are one of those things where you can gate the shit out of them and it doesn't really cause issues.
Yeah, first time I recorded drums with Josh, I saw the pillow on the ground and I observed a microphone like nicely laid on the pillow, and I was like, Josh, what is this? And why is there two different colored XLRs coming out of this microphone?
Right.
I couldn't like, I didn't learn it perfectly because you just described it once, but I guess you reversed polarity?
Right. I used to have these cables that it was basically like a Y junction XLR.
Yeah.
But one of the XLRs was wired in opposite polarity. You know, you just switch two of the pins on the XLR. And so the little Y cable would actually combine the top and bottom tom mics, and before it even hits the preamp, but it would phase flip, and I could choose either the top one or the bottom one, so that they wouldn't.
Yeah, to better explain like why you would want to flip the polarity of some microphones, you want everything to have their polarity in conjunction with each other, to not be fighting each other in terms of phase and polarity. And with miking, especially the top and bottom of drums, what you find is if someone smacks this tom with a stick, the top drum actually gets hit downward. So if you look at the waveform of the top microphone, it'll actually start by recording a negative pressure wave before compression. And then if you look at the waveform of a bottom mic, because they hit the top head pushes down, it pushes air, and then actually the bottom head will get pushed outward, which will then show up on the bottom microphone as a point of compression to start with. So they'll be between the top mic and the bottom mic, they'll actually be fighting each other, especially on that low end information. And suddenly by miking the top and the bottom, you are losing a ton of especially low end information. That's disastrous for like punch, for that like punchiness of a drum kit. Most people aren't like usually miking top and bottom of toms, but most people do mic top and bottom of a snare drum. The obvious thing to do is to just flip the polarity of any mic that's on the bottom of a drum, but I actually find that to not always be the case. Sometimes it's better to flip the polarity of the top mic, and it sort of depends on how they play well with the overheads. So my recommendation is just once you have your mix pulled up, any drum, you can just do this for any of your spot mics in general, but just go through, put a little plug-in on that flips the polarity and just test on and off and see if like that low end punch gets added in or goes away. And I guess also regardless of more or less punch, just does it sound better with individual microphones having their polarity flipped. That's more of like a mix trick, but something to keep in mind. The more microphones you add in, the greater the danger of having like bad phase, bad polarity, and suddenly your kit is just gonna sound like hollow and missing that punch.
So next, most people don't actually do like hat and ride microphones. I don't know if that's true. Most people I know don't do like hat and ride mics, but I do. And I find that in a mix, you know, you're gonna get the vast majority of like the sound that you want out of everything except like hat and ride. You can get a pretty darn good balance. You're getting great hat information, cymbals, all that from your overheads. But what I sometimes find is that as the drum kit is being played, maybe there's a portion of the song where they're just staying on the hat for a really long time. Or there's a portion of the song where suddenly they're just like playing the bell of the ride for a long time. And it becomes like the focal point of the drum performance, and you want to draw those specific things out. But if the drummer is doing a bunch of tom stuff, if they're doing a bunch of snare stuff while hitting that, you can't just isolate that in the overheads because the overheads are picking everything up. So I find the hat mic and a ride mic to be very useful for different parts of songs, just making sure the drum kit feels balanced left to right, being able to just draw out certain bits of like cymbal performance in certain instances where you want. Just, it gives you a bit more control. These aren't like the main sound of the hi-hat, the main sound of the ride. That's coming from the overheads, but these are just to balance everything out.
So, like angle, does angle matter like a lot?
Yeah, angle.
And distance?
Yeah, absolutely. It does matter. The main thing that we're fighting with like spot mic on hi-hats is that it just can get extremely like bright and harsh.
Yeah.
Like brutally harsh, especially in like high mids, high highs.
Yeah.
That goes to like my mic choice, which is AKG C460B, and then I have this little adapter that allows me to use an AKG CK1 capsule, which is a cardioid capsule. These are classics. A lot of people use the 451s. The 460s with the converter, I think, are better. They have a smoother, more like rolled off top end, and that helps eliminate a lot of the harshness. That's like the main thing that I'm looking for in like a hat and ride mic, is I just want a mic that has the ability to like smooth over all the insane harsh high ends that you're getting out of cymbals, but without sounding like it's just rolled off or there's like a high pass, or it's like you're losing a bunch of like that top end sparkle and like metallic bite when you want it. I find these microphones do that really well. And then in terms of angle and placement, basically with a hi-hat microphone, I'm finding that not having to worry about rejection a lot because hi-hats are just really, really loud. And so all I'm wanting is just enough distance to where no matter where in the surface of the hi-hat the drummer is hitting, it all comes into the microphone at about the same volume. But I want it to be close enough that you get a lot of that like proximity effect body of like each snare hit. I find that adds a lot to like the metallic sound of like cymbals that you really, really want. I find that is even more relevant in a ride where I put the ride mic pointing right in the center of the bell. Then the volume of the cymbal isn't changing as the cymbal is like twisting around as it's getting hit. The microphone is always the same distance, so your volume isn't fluctuating. And then also, if they play like the bell, you get that super, super metallic, awesome, crisp, biting, cut through sound of like a bell hit. And then if they're like washing the ride, I find the overheads get that just great. You don't have to worry about like spot mics for that too much.
Now we get to talk about these guys up here that sort of bring everything else together. Up until now, all these microphones, the placement for the most part, we're besides just getting the best sound individually that we can, we're also trying to create as much isolation. These are what we refer to as spot mics. The overheads are then what take all of these spot mics placed in like a stereo field, and these tie them all together. They just make them feel like they are in the same location, in a real space. So where do you place them? The most important, where I choose to place these overheads is actually one of the things that's most affected by the specific genre of what I'm about to record, because I will go anywhere from like an XY pair right above the middle, even to like a very far spaced pair out wide. I usually end up somewhere in the middle, pretty close to what it is now. This isn't like a designated mic technique, but I find that if you just give them a little bit over like an ear's width of space, it gets a great stereo field. And then in terms of placement, going back to my original philosophy, the things on a drum kit that we're like most worried about, making sure they're the most like phase coherent and have the most punch, is the kick drum and the snare. With the overheads, the thing that they are going to be picking up the most is the snare drum. So we want to make sure, no matter like how far apart, where they're facing, where these are facing exactly, we want to make sure the capsules of both of these are the exact same distance away from the snare drum. I measure from the center of the snare head, so that when the snare drum gets hit, it takes the exact same amount of time for that sound wave to hit both of the microphones, so that they are perfectly phase correlated and you're not getting any weird phase issues with the snare drum. That gives you the most punch, the most pop possible.
Can you demonstrate the easy way to measure that?
Yeah, so the easiest way for me most times is just to take some drumsticks and do hand over hand, and then kind of do that. The problem is drumsticks sometimes aren't long enough to reach to the exact capsule, and I go down to like the centimeter of like making sure that they're phase coherent. It matters that much. So if the sticks aren't far enough, then just find an XLR, take the XLR, stretch it out, and just check and make sure those capsules are like the exact same distance from each other. A lot of the time I'll see people just put these mics on boom stands and they make sure they're the exact same height off the ground because that looks aesthetically pleasing. I never see the point to that, because if you look at the actual layout of a drum kit, this depends a lot on like the individual drummer and like where they place things, but it's usually like an odd oblong shape. So you just, in my mind, want to take these, cardioid pencil condenser microphones and really think about the coverage, what you're trying to tie together, and just aim them, try to split your kit kind of in half and try to aim them so one of them is covering like a lot of one side of it using that cardioid pattern, your other is getting a lot of that other pattern, and then just make sure they're phase coherent. And then also, as we said before, very important, make sure they're at a height where the drummer isn't going to just smack it and destroy one of these microphones. room sound, I actually really like doing an MS pair. If you don't know what an MS pair is, look it up, find a tutorial. But the reason I like an MS pair as opposed to like a spaced pair of room mics is that an MS pair is perfectly phase coherent, and I find the further away you get from the drum kit, the more like washy phase issues can become, especially with like the low end, the kick, like the room sound of the kick. So I find MS gives you great adjustable stereo image in post, so you can decide if you want it to be like a really tight center focus kit or if you want it to be like really roomy, large, like warehousey sort of thing. And for my mic choices, for the side, I just like to use a ribbon because that is innately figure 8 pattern. It's perfectly figure 8 pattern. And also I just like a warmer side tone. I think that helps a lot. And then for the mid microphone, I like to use a large diaphragm condenser that has excellent off-axis frequency response, because I find that when you're doing the blending of the two microphones for like the MS pair, I've gotten better results. I don't understand like the physics of why exactly, but I've gotten better results when the microphones have really consistent off-axis frequency response. So I'm using a Neumann TLM102 and it works great. These two blended together, MS pair gives me great flexibility post of like making it sound wider, tighter. And then the other thing that I do is I always make sure that the distance from the kick drum to the MS pair is measured out. Like I pull out a tape measure and I measure it is 7 feet. Because I find at 7 feet, that is like the length of the low end frequency, like where then these are in phase with like a good like 50-40 hertz kick drum sound. So I can blend these in, and that like 40 hertz thump of the kick drum, like that chest hitting thing, will only get added onto by me blending in the room, and it won't get like weird and washy. So I was originally, like when I was taught this by someone, they used 6 feet. I find that for like more modern stuff, like 7 feet works. So I literally break out a tape measure, go from the end of the kick drum to here, and I put my MS pair.
Why do you have two microphones for the room?
That goes back to just what is an MS pair. I think I already said on video that if they don't know what it is, they just got to look it up.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I mean, just to give a quick explanation, it's just, I don't know if that makes sense.
It does a little bit.
Yeah, and I find that this, in this particular room, the way that I've designed the acoustics in here between absorption and diffusion, I find that an MS pair this far away gives a great compromise between like a really tight, precise room sound where like the spot mics aren't getting washed out by room tone, but then also if I like bring the mix of the room tone, the room mics up a lot, and I even more so like start to crush the room with like a compressor, like I can make this place sound like a large warehouse, but without like being, you know, totally out of control. I can dial it in as much as I want, which is very helpful for like mix flexibility. You just need like a large cubic footage sized room in order to get great drum tone, to allow those like low end frequencies to fully form and get drawn out, but without having like the massive amount of reflections that usually come with a big room. So
No.
I heard the snare ringing actually.
I heard something over here, yeah. I think it's the cymbals.
Let's get the
I
camera
am
really close.
activating.
I think you're right.
I'm
yeah.
activating the
Let's,
cymbal.
here. You're right. It's
Well-
the cymbal. Look at you.